May 15, 1943, Russell Islands, Solomon Sea. Lieutenant James Walsh from Pittsburgh watched the F4U Corsair bounce twice on landing, nearly careening into the coconut palms before the pilot managed to wrestle it to a stop. The plane looked wrong somehow. Nose too long, wings bent like a seagull's, cockpit set so far back the pilot couldn't see the runway over that massive engine cowling. The Marine pilots called it the Ensign Eliminator. The Navy had already given up on carrier operations after too many fatal accidents. Now the Marines were stuck with 200 of these bent-wing beasts that nobody wanted. Walsh had been flying F4F Wildcats for 8 months, lost 2 planes to Zeros, walked away from both. The Wildcat was slow and chunky but honest. It told you what it was thinking. This Corsair looked like it kept secrets. The mechanic from Detroit, Sergeant Tony Russo, spat tobacco juice near the tire and shook his head. He'd been keeping planes in the air since Guadalcanal. Never seen anything like this monster. 2,000 horsepower from a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, 4 tons empty. 650 caliber M2 Browning machine guns with 400 rounds per gun. On paper, it was the most powerful fighter America had built. In practice, it was killing more Marines than Japanese. The pilot climbed down from the cockpit, legs shaking. Lieutenant Bobby Chen from San Francisco, 23 years old, looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last 20 minutes. His first time in the Corsair. He'd stalled it twice on approach, bounced it 3 times on landing. The thing wanted to flip over and crush him. Walsh understood. They'd lost 4 pilots in training already, not to enemy fire, to the airplane itself. The next morning brought humid heat that made breathing feel like drowning. Temperature hit 95 degrees by 7 o'clock. Major Gregory Boyington gathered the squadron in the coconut grove they used for briefings. Boyington was already famous, already drinking too much, already perfect for this suicide machine. He'd flown with the Flying Tigers in China, knew the Zero better than most Americans, knew its pilots too. They were artists in those planes, ballet dancers with machine guns. The Zero could turn inside a phone booth, climb like an angel, stay in the air on fumes. Japanese pilots had been flying combat since 1937 in China. 6 years of practice killing. The Americans had been in the war 18 months. Boyington didn't sugarcoat it. The Zero pilots would laugh when they saw the Corsair. Too big? Too heavy? That bent wing would slow the roll rate. That long nose would create blind spots. The Japanese called American planes trucks. All power, no grace. The Zero was made of aluminum so thin you could punch through it, weighed half what the Corsair weighed. In a turning fight, the Corsair would lose every time. But Boyington had a different idea. Don't turn with them. Don't play their game. The Corsair could dive faster than anything in the Pacific, 450 miles per hour straight down without coming apart. The Zero's wings would rip off at 350. Use the weight, use the power, 1 pass, 1 kill. Dive from above, unleash those 650s, climb back to altitude before they know what hit them. The M2 Browning fired 1,200 rounds per minute. 6 guns meant 7,200 rounds per minute of half-inch slugs, enough to saw a Zero in half. Chen raised his hand. What about when they force us to turn? Boyington smiled that smile that meant someone was about to die. Then you're already dead, so might as well ram them. 3 days later, the intelligence officer from Boston, Captain Michael O'Brien, brought photographs from a coast watcher on Bougainville. 70 Zeros at Kahili Airfield, another 40 at Balal. The Japanese were building up for something big. The photos showed something else, too. New pilots, young faces. The cream of Japanese naval aviation had died at Midway and in the meat grinder over Guadalcanal. These were replacements. Still good, still dangerous. But not the artists who'd humiliated the Americans in 1942. Walsh spent every morning fighting the Corsair. The takeoff was the worst. Had to lock the tail wheel, or it would ground loop. Had to lead with right rudder to counter the torque, or it would flip. Had to get the tail up fast to see where you were going. The stall was violent, no warning buffet like the Wildcat. 1 second flying, next second spinning toward the jungle. Landing required faith. Couldn't see the runway until the last second. Had to trust the curve, fly the pattern by memory, drop it in blind. But when everything worked, when you got it up to 25,000 feet and pushed the nose over, it was like riding lightning. The airspeed indicator wound past 300, 350, 400. The controls got heavy but stayed responsive. The engine screamed but held together. At 400 miles per hour, you covered a mile every 9 seconds. The Zeros below looked frozen. Their pilots might see you coming, might start to turn, but physics was physics. By the time they reacted, you were already in gun range. The guns were mounted 3 in each wing, converging at 300 yards. Russo and his mechanics had bore-sighted them perfectly. At convergence, all 6 streams of bullets met at a point 18 inches wide. 24 pounds of lead per second focused on a space the size of a dinner plate. The API rounds, armor-piercing incendiary, burned at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to ignite fuel vapor, hot enough to melt aluminum. The Japanese pilots joked that American planes shot golden fireworks. They stopped joking when those fireworks cut their friends in half. June 30th, 1943. First combat mission, 16 Corsairs escorting bombers to Munda. Walsh's hands shook as he started the engine, 2,000 horsepower vibrating through the stick. The temperature was already 90 degrees at dawn. Inside the cockpit, it felt like 110. The new flight suits were supposed to help with G-forces, but mostly they just made you sweat more. He locked the tail wheel, fed in right rudder, pushed the throttle forward. The Corsair wanted to kill him immediately. Torque pulled left. The tail swung right. Too much rudder, and he'd ground loop. Not enough, and he'd hit the tower. The airplane finally decided to fly at 70 miles per hour. Gear up, flaps up, join formation. Climbing through 10,000 feet, the temperature dropped to 60 degrees. His sweat froze. The oxygen mask ice over. At 20,000 feet, it was 20 below zero. The Corsair didn't care. That big engine just kept pulling. They crossed New Georgia at 25,000 feet. Below, the jungle looked peaceful, green carpet stretching to blue water. No sign of the Japanese fighters intelligence promised. Then Chen's voice crackled through the radio. Zeros. 2 o'clock high. Walsh looked up. Couldn't see them. Then the sun flashed on aluminum. 15, maybe 20, 3,000 feet above. Perfect position for a diving attack. Boyington's voice came through calm. Nobody turns. When they dive, we dive. Straight down. They can't follow. The Zeros peeled off in pairs, graceful as dancers. Walsh had 5 seconds to appreciate their beauty. Then they were trying to kill him. Red balls floating past the canopy, 20-millimeter cannon rounds. One hit would blow a hole you could put your head through. Walsh pushed the stick forward. The Corsair nosed over into a 70-degree dive. The airspeed indicator started winding up. 300, 350, 400. The Zero behind him tried to follow. Walsh could see him in the mirror, getting smaller. At 350 miles per hour, the Zero pilot gave up. Had to. Another 50 miles per hour, and his wings would fold. Walsh kept diving. 420, 430. The jungle rushed up, altitude unwinding. 15,000, 10,000, 5,000. Pull out. The G-forces crushed him into the seat. 6 Gs, 7. His vision went gray at the edges. The Corsair groaned, but held together. Level at 2,000 feet, Walsh looked back. No Zero. They couldn't follow into those dives. Chen wasn't so lucky. A 20-millimeter round had blown a hole in his wing, hydraulic fluid streaming. No flaps for landing. He'd have to come in at 140 miles per hour, try to stop before the jungle. Walsh followed him down, watching pieces of aluminum peel off Chen's wing. The Corsair was tough, but not invincible. Chen lined up on the runway, altitude dropping, 100 feet, 50, 20, touched down at 135. No flaps to slow him, no brakes, the hydraulics were gone. The Corsair rolled toward the jungle at 90 miles per hour. Chen did the only thing he could. Kicked full rudder, ground looped the plane. The Corsair spun like a top. Tires screaming, dust exploding. The landing gear collapsed. The right wing dug into the coral. The plane cartwheeled once and stopped 50 feet from the trees. Chen crawled out, flight suit torn, blood running from his nose. Alive. The Corsair had saved him even while trying to kill him. They lost 2 pilots that day, not to enemy fire, to the airplane. Lieutenant Tom Morrison from Dallas stalled on approach. No warning, just suddenly spinning into the water. Lieutenant Pete Kowalski from Chicago got target fixation during a diving run, followed a zero down to 500 feet before trying to pull out. Not enough altitude. The G-forces were still crushing him when he hit the jungle. The Corsair was teaching them in blood. July 16, 1943, Kahili fighter sweep. No bombers to protect this time. Just 16 Corsairs looking for trouble. They found it over Bougainville. 40 Zeros climbing up from Kahili. The Japanese pilots were confident. Some of them waggled their wings. The fighter pilots' challenge, come play. The Zero could outturn anything America flew. Every American pilot knew it. Every training manual said it, never turn with a Zero. Walsh was at 28,000 feet when he spotted them. A perfect setup. The Zeros were at 15,000, climbing but not expecting company this high. The Corsair could start a dive from almost 30,000 feet. That gave them 13,000 feet to build speed. Boyington's plan was simple. Dive in pairs. One shooter, one cover. If the shooter missed, climb away. If Zeros followed, the cover man would dive on them. Use vertical space. Never get slow, never turn. The weight they hated on takeoff became their weapon in combat. Walsh picked a Zero climbing through 18,000, pushed over into the dive. The airspeed built fast, 350, 400, 420. The Zero grew in his gun sight. The pilot saw him coming, started to turn. Too late. Walsh opened fire at 300 yards. The convergence was perfect. 6 streams of 50 caliber rounds met at a point just forward of the cockpit. The first round shattered the engine, the next tore through the cockpit. The armor-piercing incendiary rounds hit the fuel tanks. The Zero didn't just catch fire, it exploded, aluminum skin vaporizing in 3,000-degree heat. Walsh pulled up hard, G-forces crushing his chest. 6 Gs, 7, 8. Vision going black. The Corsair climbed like a rocket, back through 20,000 feet before the G-forces eased. He looked down. The Zero was gone, not falling. Gone. Disintegrated. The M2 Brownings hadn't just shot it down, they'd deleted it from existence. But the Japanese pilots were learning too. The next Zero dove away when Walsh approached, using the Corsair's own tactic. Walsh followed him down, closing slowly. The Zero pilot waited until Walsh was committed, then yanked back on the stick. The Zero could pull 11 Gs. Its pilot would black out, but the plane would hold. Together. The Zero looped straight up, ending above and behind Walsh. Now, the hunter was hunted. Walsh had 2 seconds to live. The Zero pilot was already triggering his cannon. Then Bobby Chen came down like the wrath of God. 450 miles per hour, 6 guns firing. The Zero came apart in midair. The engine separated from the fuselage, the wings folded backwards. The pilot's body tumbled free, already dead, riddled with 50 caliber holes. Chen pulled up so hard his G-suit bladders burst. Blood vessels in his eyes hemorrhaged, but alive. That was the pattern. Dive and climb. Energy fighting instead of angles. The Corsair pilots who tried to turn with Zeros died. The ones who remembered Boyington's rules lived, mostly. The math was brutal, trading altitude for speed for kills. Each dive started 2,000 feet lower than the last. Eventually you ran out of sky. Lieutenant David Parker from Memphis ran out of sky over Shortland Island. Last seen diving through 5,000 feet with 2 Zeros trying to follow. His wingman said Parker was laughing over the radio, saying something about his daddy's moonshine being stronger than Japanese 20mm. The Zeros pulled out. Parker didn't. Maybe target fixation, maybe mechanical failure, maybe he just decided 3 kills was enough for 1 life. The jungle kept its secrets. August 15th, 1943. The Japanese tried something new. Instead of climbing to meet the Corsairs, they stayed low, 5,000 feet and below, using clouds for cover, forcing the Americans to come down where the Zeros' turning advantage mattered more. Smart tactic. Would have worked against Wildcats or P-40s, but the Corsair had another trick. From 30,000 feet, Walsh could see everything. The whole battle space laid out like a map. Radio calls, painting pictures, Chen fighting 3 Zeros at 8,000, Morrison diving on a formation at 12,000, Kowalski climbing away from 2 more, and below it all, hiding in the clouds at 3,000 feet, 20 Zeros waiting to ambush anyone who got low and slow. Walsh told his wingman, a kid from Kansas named Jimmy Stewart, who'd been a math teacher before the war, to stay high. Cover him. Then Walsh did something insane. Rolled inverted and pulled straight down. 90-degree dive. Vertical. The airspeed indicator went crazy. 400, 450, 470. The Corsair was shaking. Rivets straining. 490, 500 miles per hour. The controls locked solid from air pressure. Walsh could barely move the stick. The clouds rushed up. He punched through at 3,000 feet, doing 480 miles per hour. The Zeros were right there, flying lazy circles, waiting for Americans to bounce. They never saw him coming. Walsh had maybe 2 seconds of firing time at that speed. He picked the leader, a green Zero with kill markings on the fuselage. Opened fire at 400 yards. At that velocity, the 50 caliber rounds hit, like artillery. The Zero's tail section separated completely, just gone. The rest of the plane tumbled wildly, pilot probably already dead from the shock. Walsh pulled out at 500 feet, crushing G-forces, turning his vision red. 9 Gs, maybe 10. His body weight felt like half a ton. The Corsair's wings bent visibly, but held. Climbing back through 8,000 feet, he checked his ammunition. Still had 300 rounds per gun, enough for 2 more passes. The Japanese pilots were rattled now. They'd never seen anything dive that fast and survive. Some tried to climb to meet the Corsairs. Bad idea. In a climb, the Corsair's power advantage was absolute. That massive engine just pulled them up like an elevator. Others dove for the deck, trying to escape. But the Corsair could follow them down, gaining speed every foot. One Japanese pilot, probably a veteran, tried something clever. As Walsh dove on him, the Zero pilot cut his engine and deployed full flaps. Airspeed dropping instantly from 200 to 90 miles per hour. Walsh overshot by a mile, the Corsair blazing past at 400 miles per hour. The Zero pilot restarted his engine, retracted flaps, and gave chase. For about 10 seconds, he had a shot. Then Walsh used the Corsair's power to zoom climb, 3,000 feet per minute straight up. The Zero tried to follow but stalled at 60 degrees, falling away like a leaf. They landed with fuel gauges on empty, gun barrels burned white, hydraulic fluid leaking from overstressed systems. 7 Zeros confirmed destroyed. No Corsairs lost, though Morrison's plane had so many holes, Russo said, he could see through it. The Japanese pilots had stopped laughing at the bent-wing bird, started calling it whistling death for the sound it made in those terrifying dives. But the cost was showing, not just in aircraft, in pilots. Chen's hands shook constantly now, not fear. Adrenaline damage, his body couldn't stop producing it. Walsh had lost 30 pounds, down from 170 to 140. The stress of wrestling the Corsair, the G-forces, the constant edge of death. They were burning themselves up. The doctor from Baltimore, Captain Aaron Weinstein, tried to explain. The human body wasn't designed for 10 G pulls. Blood vessels burst, organs shifted, joints compressed. Every combat mission aged them a month. September 3rd, 1943. Intelligence reported something big moving, 150 Zeros converging on Rabaul. The Japanese were planning something. Maybe another run at Guadalcanal, maybe an attack on the new American bases. Whatever it was, those Zeros had to be stopped. The problem was range. Rabaul was at the edge of the Corsair's combat radius. They'd have maybe 10 minutes over target before fuel forced them home. Boyington had an idea. Crazy, but all his ideas were crazy. Drop tanks, belly tanks full of extra fuel. Use them to get there. Drop them before combat. Fight on internal fuel. The mechanics worked all. Night welding attachment points. The tanks threw off the Corsair's balance, made it even more unstable. But they added 200 miles of range. September 5th, dawn. 24 Corsairs lifted off in the gray light. Walsh's plane felt wrong with the belly tank. Sluggish. The center of gravity, all wrong. Climbing through 15,000 feet, ice forming on the wings, 20,000, 25,000. The temperature hit 40 below zero. The belly tank started leaking. Fuel streaming into the slipstream. One spark, and they'd explode. New Britain appeared through broken clouds. Rabaul's Simpson Harbor filled with ships, and above it, circling at 20,000 feet, the largest fighter formation Walsh had ever seen. At least 100 Zeros, stacked from 15,000 to 25,000 feet. Waiting. Boyington's voice crackled through. Drop tanks. Walsh pulled the release. The tank fell away, tumbling toward the jungle. The Corsair immediately felt better. Lighter, angrier, time to fight. The Japanese had learned from previous encounters. They didn't climb to meet the Corsairs, didn't give them altitude advantage. Instead, they spread out, covering every altitude. No matter where the Corsairs dove, they'd have to pass through layers of Zeros. Smart. But Boyington had learned too. Instead of diving immediately, the Corsairs climbed higher, 30,000 feet. The Zeros couldn't follow that high. Their engines starved for oxygen. The Corsairs circled, looking down on the enemy formation. Then Boyington gave the order. Not a mass dive, sequential attacks. 4 planes dive while 20 cover. As the first 4 climb away, the next 4 dive. Continuous pressure from maximum altitude. Walsh was in the third wave. Watched the first 2 groups tear through the Japanese formation. Zero scattering, trying to climb, trying to pursue. Chaos. Perfect chaos. His turn, nose over. Dive angle 70 degrees. Airspeed building 400 miles per hour. 420, 440. A Zero appeared in his gun sight, trying to dodge left. Walsh kicked rudder, lined up, fired. 2-second burst. The API rounds looked like laser beams at this speed. The Zero's left wing folded, then the right. The fuselage spun wildly, pilot trapped inside. Pull out at 8,000 feet. Vision going black from G-forces. Climb back to altitude. Stewart was still with him, covering. Good wingman. Below, the sky was full of burning planes, mostly Zeros, but some Corsairs too. Lieutenant Frank Patterson from Rhode Island had tried to turn with a Zero, lasted maybe 10 seconds. The Zero got on his tail, cannon rounds walking up the fuselage. The Corsair's armor plate saved Patterson for another 5 seconds. Then, a round found the oil cooler. The engine seized instantly. Patterson bailed out over Simpson Harbor. Bad place to land. The Japanese Navy shot him in his parachute. Morrison got bounced climbing away from his second run. 3 Zeros, boxing him in. He did the only thing left. Firewalled the throttle and rammed the nearest one. Both planes exploded. Morrison's last words over the radio were about his kid sister's birthday being next week. Asked someone to send her flowers. The battle lasted 12 minutes. Felt like 12 hours. When Boyington called withdrawal, Walsh had 60 rounds left per gun, barely enough for one pass. Fuel gauge showing 30 minutes to empty. They'd never make it back to base. Plan B, emergency field on Treasury Island, 40 miles closer. Maybe possible. The flight back was quiet. Everyone counting fuel, computing distance, calculating survival. The Corsair burned 20 gallons per hour at cruise. The gauge showed 15 gallons. Treasury Island was 30 minutes away. The math didn't work. Walsh leaned the mixture until the engine coughed, dropped to minimum RPM, glided when possible. Every mile stretched their luck thinner. Chen ran out of fuel 50 miles from Treasury, announced it calmly, engine quitting, going in. See you boys later. Pushed the nose down, looking for the best spot to ditch. The Corsair glided about as well as a brick, 1,200 feet per minute straight down. Chen had maybe a minute to set up. He picked a stretch of calm water, lowered flaps to slow down, hit at 90 miles per hour. The Corsair skipped once, twice, then submarined. Chen got out just before it sank. A Catalina flying boat picked him up 3 hours later. Sharks had been circling, but Chen still had his .45, put rounds in the water whenever they got close. Walsh's engine quit on final approach to Treasury Island. No warning. Just suddenly a glider, too low to bail out, too fast to survive a crash. The runway was right there, 300 yards, but the Corsair without power dropped like a stone. Walsh did mental math, descent rate versus distance. Not going to make it, going to hit the trees 50 yards short. Stewart saw it happening, did something impossible, dove his Corsair underneath Walsh's plane, waggled his wings to create turbulence. The disturbed air gave Walsh's plane just enough extra lift, just enough to clear the trees by 10 feet. The dead Corsair slammed onto the runway, landing gear collapsing, sliding 800 feet on its belly. Walsh climbed out, legs shaking, and watched Stewart do a victory roll at 50 feet. Crazy bastard math teacher had computed the exact angle to create lifting vortices. Score for the day, 31 zeros, confirmed destroyed. 8 Corsairs lost, 5 pilots killed, 3 wounded. Victory, technically. But they couldn't sustain those losses. The Japanese had pilots to spare, the Marines didn't. That night, Walsh couldn't stop his hands from shaking. Not fear, not anymore, something else. His body forgetting how to be normal, how to not produce adrenaline every second. October 1943 brought worse weather and better tactics. The Japanese stopped playing the Corsair's game. No more high-altitude gatherings. Now they flew in small groups, low, using weather fronts for cover, forcing the Americans to come down where turning mattered. The Corsair pilots adapted, started working in larger teams, 8-plane flights instead of 4, half diving while half covered. Always someone with altitude advantage, but the Japanese had another card to play, night attacks, single bombers, flying so low they were invisible to radar, dropping their load and disappearing before fighters could scramble. Sleep deprivation became another weapon. Every night, air raid sirens, sometimes real, sometimes false. The pilots averaged 3 hours sleep. Exhaustion made them sloppy. Sloppy got you killed. Lieutenant Roger White from Oregon got sloppy on October 15th. Forgot to check his 6 o'clock position during a dive. The Zero was waiting exactly where training said it would be. 20mm cannon rounds walked up White's fuselage. The armor plate stopped most of them, but one found the gap between plates, entered just below his shoulder blade, exited through his chest. White stayed conscious long enough to get the Corsair back to base. Died as the corpsman tried to get him out of the cockpit. His last words were about the Oregon rain, how he missed it. October 20th almost ended Walsh's war. Routine patrol turned into an ambush, 12 Zeros hiding in a cloud bank at 8,000 feet. Walsh never saw them coming. First indication was tracers passing his canopy, red balls of light, 20mm. He broke hard left, G-suit inflating, vision graying. The Zero followed. This pilot was good, veteran, didn't overshoot, stayed in the sweet spot, Walsh's 6 o'clock position. Walsh tried everything, barrel rolls, chandelle, split S. The Zero matched him move for move, getting closer. The next burst would find him. Walsh did the only thing left. Pushed the stick full forward, negative Gs, weightless. Then passed, weightless. His body slammed against the canopy. Blood rushed to his head, eyes feeling like they'd explode. The Corsair went inverted, diving straight down. The Zero pilot, surprised, hesitated half a second. Enough. Walsh pulled through the bottom of the loop, came up behind the Zero, One burst. The Zero's engine exploded. Oil and flames. The pilot never got out. But Walsh had torn something inside, blood in his oxygen mask. The negative Gs had ruptured something. He flew back to base tasting copper, landed barely conscious. The doctor found internal bleeding. Not immediately fatal, but bad enough. 2 weeks grounded while his body repaired itself. 2 weeks of watching other pilots take his plane up. 2 weeks of funeral services. By November, they were winning, but dying. The kill ratio was 12-1 in the Corsair's favor, but the Japanese kept coming. New pilots, younger faces, but still dangerous. The Corsair was proving itself the best fighter in the Pacific, but it demanded everything from its pilots. Chen developed ulcers. Kowalski's hair went gray. He was 24. Walsh lost another 10 pounds. Down to 130, the doctor said they were literally consuming themselves. Burning muscle tissue for energy their bodies couldn't provide anymore. November 11, 1943, Armistice Day. 25 years since the end of the Great War. The war to end all wars. Walsh thought about that as he strapped into the Corsair. His father had fought in France, came back different. Never talked about it except once, drunk, crying about friends who didn't come back. Now Walsh understood. You didn't talk about it because words were too small. How do you explain watching Morrison ram a Zero? How do you describe Chen ditching in shark waters? How do you tell someone about the smell of hydraulic fluid mixed with blood? The mission was another fighter sweep over Rabaul. The Japanese were getting desperate. Kamikaze wasn't official policy yet, but some pilots were choosing it anyway. If they couldn't outfight the Corsair, they'd ram it. Trade one for one. Honor in death. Walsh watched a damaged Zero deliberately fly into Stewart's plane. Both exploded. The math teacher from Kansas, who'd saved Walsh's life with turbulence calculations, was gone in a second. No time for last words, no parachute, just fire and fragments falling toward the sea. Walsh felt something break inside, not sadness, not rage, something colder. He dove on the next Zero with mechanical precision, fired at maximum range, watched it burn, climbed, picked another, dove, fired, killed. No emotion, no thought, just the job. When they landed, he had 5 kills for the day. Ace in a day. Boynton slapped his back. The other pilots cheered. Walsh felt nothing. Went to his tent, sat on his cot, tried to remember what Stewart's face looked like. Couldn't. The final push came in December. The Japanese Navy was pulling back, consolidating, but they wanted to bloody the Americans one more time. December 17th, they threw everything at Rabaul, 200 fighters and bombers, the largest air battle of the Solomon campaign. The Corsairs met them at Angels 25,000 feet. Walsh was flying Chen's wing now. Chen was flight leader. 22 years old and flight leader because everyone else was dead or broken. They had 16 Corsairs against 40 Zeros protecting 30 bombers. The odds didn't matter anymore. They were beyond odds. The battle turned into a vertical maze. Corsairs diving, climbing, diving again. Zeros trying to protect the bombers while fighting off the attacks. The sky filled with tracers, explosions, falling planes. Walsh stopped thinking. Let training take over. Dive, fire, climb, repeat. His guns overheated, barrels glowing red. He kept firing. An ammunition can exploded in his left wing, blowing a hole 3 feet wide. He kept flying. Chen got hit climbing away from his third run, 20 millimeter through the engine. Oil everywhere. The windscreen went black. Chen flew by instruments, calling, positions, until the engine seized. Then he rolled inverted, bailed out. His parachute opened just as a Zero lined up on him. Walsh dove without thinking, put himself between Chen and the Zero. The 20 millimeter rounds meant for Chen hit Walsh's armor plate. Sounded like sledgehammers. The plate held. Walsh turned into the Zero, accepting it would outturn him, buying Chen time to reach the water. The Zero pilot was so focused on Walsh, he never saw Kowalski coming from above. The Zero disintegrated under concentrated fire from 650s. They saved Chen, lost 5 Corsairs, killed 18 Zeros and 12 bombers. Victory. But Walsh couldn't celebrate. Something inside him had gone quiet. The part that felt things. He flew 3 more missions like a machine, precise, lethal, empty. December 23rd, his body quit. Not dramatically, just stopped working. Walsh climbed into the Corsair for a dawn patrol and couldn't remember how to start it. Sat there, hands on controls he'd used 100 times, mind blank. The corpsman found him 2 hours later, still sitting there, tears running down his face, though he didn't remember starting to cry. The doctor called it combat fatigue, said Walsh had flown 138 combat missions, was supposed to go home after 50. His body had been running on adrenaline so long it forgot how to function without it. They sent him to a hospital in Australia. Clean sheets, real food, nurses who smiled. Walsh lay there feeling like a ghost, watching his hands shake, listening to his heart race for no reason, dreaming of Corsairs and Zeros and friends on fire. 2 weeks later, Chen showed up, also broken, ulcers bleeding so bad he'd been vomiting blood in his cockpit. They sat together, not talking, nothing to say, both down to 120 pounds, both aged 10 years and 10 months, both wondering if they'd ever feel normal again. January 1944, a new doctor arrived. Navy psychiatrist from New York, Commander Sarah Goldstein. First thing she did was throw away their sedatives. Said they needed to feel things, not numb them. Started making them talk, not about victories or tactics, about Morrison's sister, Stewart's math students, White's rain, the human things, the losses that mattered. Slowly, Walsh started remembering he was human, started eating, gained 5 pounds, 10, the shaking decreased, still there, but manageable. Chen started cracking jokes again, dark humor, but humor. They weren't fixed, would never be fixed, but functional. Goldstein called it that. Functional, like they were machines being repaired. February 1944, they got word. The Corsair had been redesignated, no longer a failed carrier fighter, now the premier marine fighter-bomber. Kill ratio final tally, 11-1. The bent-wing bird that nobody wanted had become the best American fighter in the Pacific. The Japanese pilots who'd laughed at it were mostly dead. The ones still alive ran when they saw that distinctive gull. Wing shape. Walsh got orders home in March. Training command, teaching new pilots how to not die in the Corsair. He stood on the dock in San Francisco, wearing a uniform that hung loose on his skeletal frame. His mother was there, tried not to cry when she saw him. Failed. His father, the great war veteran, just nodded. One warrior to another. No words needed. The train ride to Pensacola took 4 days. Walsh sat by the window, watching America roll by. Farmers in fields, kids playing baseball, normal life. He felt like an alien visitor. These people had no idea. How could they? How could anyone who hadn't been there understand what happened at 30,000 feet over Rabaul? At Pensacola, Walsh met his trainees, fresh-faced ensigns, eager to get into the fight. They looked at him with awe. The ace, the veteran. Walsh wanted to tell them to run, go fly transports, bombers, anything but fighters. Instead, he taught them Boyington's rules. Never turn with a zero. Always keep altitude advantage. Trust the Corsair's strength. Respect its viciousness. When one asked what combat was really like, Walsh said it was like being on fire while drowning while falling off a cliff. The kid laughed. Thought it was a joke. Walsh flew with them, showing them how to deal with the torque on takeoff, how to recover from the violent stall, how to land blind. But mostly, he taught them to survive the plane itself. The Corsair killed more Marine pilots in training than the Japanese did in combat the first year. These kids needed to respect it, fear it a little. The ones who got cocky died. One trainee, a kid from Nebraska named Johnson, reminded Walsh of Stewart. Same math brain, same precise flying, same bad jokes. Walsh rode him harder than the others, criticized every landing, made him repeat maneuvers until perfect. Johnson thought Walsh hated him. The opposite. Walsh was trying to save him, give him every tool to survive, because Stewart had all the tools and still died. News from the Pacific came monthly. The Corsairs were pushing closer to Japan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. The Japanese were fighting harder, desperate. Kamikazes were official policy now, trading lives for ships. The Corsairs were shooting them down, but some got through. Always some got through, Chen wrote once. Short letter. Was back flying against doctor's orders. Said the new pilots were good but green. Said he missed the old days, which was insane, because the old days were hell. But Walsh understood. There was something clean about that hell. Simple. Stay alive. Kill the enemy. Protect your wingman. Everything else was noise. April 1945. Walsh had been training pilots for a year, sent 300 kids to the Pacific, got letters from some, not from others. The ones who died, their families sometimes wrote, thanking him for training their son. Walsh kept those letters in a box, couldn't read them. Each one was a failure. Another kid he hadn't prepared enough. Johnson graduated top of his class. Got orders to VMF 312, Chen Squadron. Walsh shook his hand, wanted to say something profound. Ended up just saying, "Don't turn with zeros." Johnson laughed, still thought it was partly a joke. 3 months later, Chen wrote that Johnson had made ace in 2 weeks, then got shot down over Kyushu, survived, was picked up by a submarine. Kid was lucky, or good, or both. May 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. The Pacific War got all the resources now. B-29s were burning Japanese cities nightly. The invasion of Japan was planned for November. Estimated casualties, 1 million Americans, 5 million Japanese. The Corsairs would fly close support. The pilots who survived this long would have to survive that hell. Then August 6th. Hiroshima. 1 bomb, 1 city. Gone. August 9th. Nagasaki. Walsh heard the news in the ready room. The trainees were excited. War might be over. Walsh felt nothing or everything. Too much to process. All those deaths. Morrison, Stewart, White, Patterson. For what? If 1 bomb could end it, why did they have to die? August 15th. Japan surrendered. The war was over. Really over. Walsh stood on the flight line, watching Corsairs practice landings. The bent-wing bird that had started as a failure became a killer, ended as a legend. 2,300 Japanese aircraft destroyed, kill ratio 11-1. The best American fighter of the war, statistics said. But statistics didn't measure the cost. Didn't count Chen's ulcers, Kowalski's gray hair, Walsh's hands that still shook, the nightmares that would last decades, the friends who didn't come home. Statistics were for people who weren't there. For the ones who were, there were only faces, voices, moments. Morrison ramming the zero, Stewart saving Walsh with math and turbulence, Chen joking while bleeding internally. Walsh got discharged in December 1945, went home to Pittsburgh, got a job at an accounting firm, normal life, married a girl named Betty who didn't ask about the war, had 2 kids, boy and girl. Named the boy James Stewart Walsh. Never explained the middle name? Couldn't. Chen stayed in, made colonel. Died in 1952 testing a new jet fighter, pushing the envelope, as always. Kowalski became a commercial pilot, flew until mandatory retirement. Died in his sleep at 91, probably dreaming of Corsairs and Zeros at Angels 25. Walsh lived until 2001. 56 years after the war. Never talked about it much. His kids knew he'd been a pilot, knew he'd been decorated, didn't know he'd been an ace, didn't know about the shaking hands, the nightmares, the survivor's guilt that never really went away. At the funeral, his son found a box in the attic, 300 letters from trainees, photos from the Russell Islands, a list of names, the ones who didn't make it. There was one more thing. A Japanese 20mm shell, diffused, with a note. This one had my name on it, Stewart got in the way. Pass it on. The son didn't. Understand. How could he? You had to be there, had to feel the Corsair shake at 500 miles per hour, had to see Zeros coming apart under the concentrated fire of 6 M2 Brownings, had to watch friends die, and somehow keep flying. The Corsair itself lived on, flew in Korea. Some even made it to Vietnam, flying ground support. The bent-wing bird that nobody wanted became the longest-serving piston fighter in history. The Japanese pilots who'd laughed at it in 1943 were wrong. It wasn't just a truck. It was death with wings. A killer that demanded everything from its pilots and gave back only survival. Sometimes not even that. In the end, the numbers tell one story. 2,300 enemy aircraft destroyed. 11-to-1 kill ratio. The feelings tell another. Young men turned old. Bodies broken by G-forces and stress. Minds scarred by things that couldn't be unseen. The Corsair won the air war in the Pacific. The cost was measured in more than aluminum and fuel. It was measured in humanity. Pieces of soul left at 30,000 feet. Friends' voices that would never fade. Moments of terror and triumph that would echo until the last pilot's last breath. The F4U Corsair was retired from military service in 1957. Walsh retired from memory never. Some things you carry until you can't carry anything anymore. Some debts you pay until there's nothing left to pay with. Some stories you tell without words because words are too small. The bent-wing bird taught them all of that, taught them in blood and fire and friendship and loss, taught them at 400 miles per hour with 650s screaming, taught them that survival was victory, and victory was survival, and sometimes neither was enough. But they flew. Despite the fear, despite the odds, despite the Corsair trying to kill them as hard as the enemy, they flew. And in flying, in fighting, in dying and surviving, they wrote their names in vapor trails across Pacific skies, temporary signatures on infinite blue, there and gone, like them, like all of us, but real in the moment, absolutely real, absolutely necessary, absolutely unforgettable for those who were there. The Japanese pilots who laughed at the F4U Corsair in 1943 didn't laugh long. The ones who survived learned respect, learned fear, learned that the bent-wing bird with its massive engine and 6 M2 Brownings was not a joke, but a promise. A promise that American kids from Pittsburgh and San Francisco and Kansas would climb into an airplane that hated them, master it, and use it to clear the skies, one dive at a time, one burst at a time, one friend's death at a time, until the war was won. Thanks for joining us on this journey through one of history's incredible survival stories. If you found it compelling, give it a like, and share it with someone who appreciates these tales of courage. And don't forget to subscribe for more.